Greetings, my name is Veronica Heiskell, I'm the Director of Experiential Learning and Student Employment here in Career Success. And I'm excited to talk to you about effective interviewing, whether you're interviewing for positions within the academy or outside in industry. And we'll also touch on salary negotiation. These are going to be split into two videos, so you can just focus on interviewing and salary negotiation, depending on where you're at. So let's talk interviewing. So I'm not going to be able to go in depth into every question that you could possibly be asked, right? But I am going to teach you how to respond to common questions and then some more specific types of questions that you might encounter. And these are common to be encountered in industry, and they may be encountered outside of industry. Almost all of you will have been asked any of these questions at some point in your life. I would actually argue anyone who's watching this has probably been asked at least one of these questions. Common questions are designed for a variety of reasons. So tell me about yourself, right? Anytime I get asked a question or I'm thinking about what questions I might be asked, I like to start with, why would I be asked this question, right? What would be the purpose of being asked this type of question? So tell me about yourself. I'm thinking someone asked me that when they want to know, how does your experience relate to this position? How'd you get here? And that's how I like to respond, is thinking about, okay, how did I end up in this Zoom room or chair or whatever with this person? So as an example, instead of going kind of everywhere you could go, with tell me about yourself, I'm going to want to explain a little bit about me and my background and what drew me specifically to that position. So I'm just going to make this up, right? So let's say I'm graduating from a program. I'll share a bit about that program. So absolutely, it's so lovely to meet you. My name is Veronica. I use she, her pronouns. I just finished my doctoral program in insert major here, and I'm really excited to speak to you about this position. I originally became interested in this field because of blah, blah, blah. So you're going to highlight a couple key experiences that helped you to discover the field and build your skill sets within that field. And that can include transferable skills. You might share a little bit more about yourself, and you're ending with your excitement about the role. That's kind of the structure. Any of these questions, you're aiming for a couple of minutes, 2 to 3, usually, maybe a little bit longer if they've asked a complex question. Next, what interests you about this position? What do we think they're trying to gauge there? I would say they're usually gauging, do you know what job you're applying to? Right? So this is just a test essentially of, do they remember what they've applied to? Have they looked at the job description? So much like you tailoring your tell me about yourself question, the what interests you about this position, to prep for this, read through the job description and consider what excites you about it and talk about them. And relate what excites you about it to past experiences that you've had. One of the most common challenges that I see in responses for any interview question is that folks will directly answer the question without providing examples. And while you might answer the question and it's technically true, examples help to back up and provide evidence of how you're a good communicator or the way that you do these things. What are your greatest strengths? This is the question that is most often identified as the most challenging from any questions that are asked for students that I've worked with. So what I encourage you to do as you consider preparing, right, as you look at the job description or you're thinking about this role, I want you to think about, what are the 3 key things that you bring to this position? We're not thinking of your comparison to other humans in this case, right? Because we can't control who else is applying. We can't control their experience. What you can control is your confidence in knowing your ability to do this job. And what makes you confident about that? I mentioned confidence because perhaps your experience is different than mine, but many grad students I've worked with over the years, grad school can be a little challenging on the confidence. You just may not be feeling very confident. And that is core key. So if you're in that space of like, I don't even know what my strengths are at this point, I just feel like exhausted and burnt out. And I just like, I don't even know what to say. I encourage you to meet with a career engagement specialist and talk this out. So you can also talk to a close friend. And I want you to reflect positively on, what do I bring? How do I know I can do this job? And if you're feeling that negative self-talk, therapy can be really helpful to address it, in addition to doing some career coaching. When you're answering, what are your greatest strengths? You are going to default back to, what are the 3 key things that I bring to this role? You can choose more than 3, but often 3 is like an easier number for us to remember. It's kind of easier to work with. And that's really what we want you to see, right? That you're demonstrating those 3 key aspects of you in this answer. So let's say that detail orientation is a really solid skill of yourselves. You'd say, I'm incredibly detail oriented, and then give an example of how you've been detail oriented, whatever the skill sets might be that you've identified. Now, similarly, if you get a weakness-based question, if you could change one thing about yourself, what would it be? Or what are your weaknesses? Similar questions, right? The strategy that I often teach here is to, and it makes sense, right? I do want to preface that I don't think that this is not answering the question. I think that our strengths are inherently linked to our limitations. For example, let's say that I am really detail-oriented. Well, it might take me longer to work on a report than it would someone else because I want it to get to that level. Maybe that bleeds into perfectionism, which is very common in graduate school. You would highlight your answer, right, about a weakness. As I shared, my strength is that I am highly detail oriented, but I noticed as I was working on group projects, whatever it might be, that it was taking me longer to get my deliverables into the team, because I really wanted it to be at the right shape. What I learned is that I needed to give myself earlier deadlines than the deadlines of my teammates. That way, I had sufficient time and I planned out my time so that I would have sufficient time to get the report to the level that I wanted it to be while ensuring that I maintained my deadlines. And then you could give an example of how you did that, right? So what you've done is give them an area of growth for you, and you're describing how you're improving on it or how you're addressing it. When you think about the weaknesses, if you're asked this question, I dislike the question. I don't think it's a very good one. I'd rather focus on your strengths and knowing what those are. Whatever. Lots of employers still ask about the weakness. I would encourage you to, when you think about the weaknesses or you prep this question, to just make sure you're not selecting a weakness that is so substantively related to the job. So if you think that, oh, my weakness is that I hate public speaking. I don't know. Maybe that's true for you. But the job you're applying to has an incredibly large component that is public speaking. I'd probably highlight something else than that. Because if you're able to do the public speaking, even if you hate it, kind of all that matters. Now, I would encourage you to more broadly take a step back and make sure that the components of the job are things that you want to do and, would utilize your talents. I would encourage you to take a step back and make sure that the job includes components where you do feel like you are able to utilize your talents and strengths. So all of these that we've gone over are questions that you can prep, right? You can have canned responses, canned answers, which is why most interview questions are no longer those common questions. You're still going to see a couple of them in each interview, but the vast majority of your interview are going to be behavioral interviewing questions. Why? Why do they utilize these? Because they don't have answers. They are harder to prepare for. You can still prep for them, but it's a lot more work. Absolutely. And it does give whoever is interviewing you a much better sense of who you are and how you think. So the goal is to see how you solve problems, how you think, how you showcase your skills. So here's an example, right? Tell me about a time you faced a challenge in a team. Well, I don't exactly know what they want me to say. I kind of know what they want me to say for common interview questions, because I've just essentially told you what they want you to say. And tell me about a time you faced a challenge in a team. One interview committee may be looking for a really different kind of response based on how their office is structured and how they work than another. So you don't always know. It's harder to predict what are they hoping for me to say, or you can still ask yourself, what's the purpose of them asking me this question, and do your best. But for behavioral interviewing questions, there's a different kind of preparation that's needed and some strategies that will help you in feeling more confident in answering them. The lived reality is that you are going to encounter behavioral interviewing questions that you did not exactly prep for. It's just pretty challenging to think of every single question that someone could ask you, especially if you're thinking about faculty interviews and interviewing with lots of individuals. There's likely going to be some questions that you didn't necessarily prepare for. Some other common questions, usually conflict with your supervisor, challenges, working on a project, making a decision quickly. There's lots of examples, and I encourage you to check out our website to learn more information about them. But let me introduce a technique to help you. So STAR, right? You are setting the scene, you're briefly describing the situation and purpose. What was the task that we needed to do? You then spend the majority of your time talking about the action, so what you actually did, and you share a result. Why this is helpful. As humans, this is not really how we approach storytelling, right? We tend to love setting the scene. So we'll spend a lot of time setting the scene and usually spend just a teeny bit of time talking about the action. And sometimes we even forget to mention the result, right? Because we're venting about an annoying group project that we were working on or something like that. This is different, right? You're working with an interviewer. You're not just complaining about group members not doing the work. Because if I answered, tell me about a time you faced a conflict in a team. Yeah, I was in a group project. It was automatically assigned. My group members, they really weren't active. They didn't want to do any of the work. So I ended up just taking the full load of work, and I did the presentation. That doesn't really tell me a ton about you. It's mostly venting about other people. And maybe I am looking for an ability to navigate challenges. Maybe I'm looking for how you broach and try to ensure a more equitable workload for everyone, or how you advocate for yourself. Who knows? But STAR is going to help you to stay on track when you're interviewing. So here's an example. So if they ask you, tell me about a time you demonstrated leadership, I swear, behavioral interviewing is not all conflict and challenge. There's many times they're showcasing specific skill sets and looking for an example. What makes this challenging is you need an example at hand. So before we go into this specific example, I want to encourage you that the most important way to prepare for these behavioral interviewing questions is to think through your experience. Is to take a look at sample behavioral interviewing questions and think about what example you would utilize, right? Have those examples ready to go. Practice saying them aloud. That's huge. I'll show you a tool in a bit that we have that we're paying for that I encourage you to utilize to help you prepare for your interviews. So that's the other kind of piece. Yes, I'm explaining this technique. You're also going to want to spend time with thinking about your past experiences and what you would mention for specific types of questions. I do get asked also, so I'll briefly address it. What if you blank? What if you have no experience that's relevant to that question? And in those cases, I encourage you to think, what is most similar? What might they be looking for? So let's say it's the question, tell me about a time you faced a conflict with a supervisor. And you're like, I've got to be honest, I've been incredibly lucky that I haven't experienced any conflicts with my supervisor. However, I can tell you about a time I didn't see eye to eye with a colleague on a project, or when I was leading a group project, something like that. So try to find something that's similar, and also ask yourself, what is a conflict? It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be huge. It could be a time that you miscommunicated or that there was a miscommunication. The key is thinking through those examples. It doesn't have to be dramatic. You're just trying to demonstrate what you've experienced before and how you approach it. There is no right answer, which I know makes this annoying. But if you're following the STAR technique, you're going to give them a lot of information that's necessary and for the most part should answer the question. So tell me about a time you demonstrated leadership. We start with the situation. My capstone course required a large group project. I was selected to be the leader of our team. We move into the task. We had to develop a full marketing plan for a local business. Okay, concrete, structured, we're done. We don't have to lay any more groundwork, no additional explanation. Then we spend the bulk of our time talking about the action, and we don't forget to include a result. So what did you do? I coordinated the group meetings. I stayed in constant communication with the members, the local business, and our professor. I monitored the progress of each member on a variety of tasks, from creating ads to designing a website. You can even explain how you did that monitoring. I edited the design and text contributions from the team into a final portfolio and developed the presentation we made to the class and the business. The results, the business ended up using 2 of our print ads on our website, and our group received an A. Now, what does this look like when it's a conflict or something, right? The results is usually what you learned from it. So you can reframe the result in terms of, yes, what happened, but then what did I learn? How has it changed the way that I approach things now? So that's behavioral interviewing. There are lots of guides about behavioral interviewing that I encourage you to take a look at, and I'm happy to talk to you about. Now, finally, I want to talk about stress questions. These are weird questions that are thrown in essentially for that interviewer to stress you out. And it's designed to see how you do under stress. So behavioral interviewing questions are stressful, but you have a technique and a structure. You can use a similar technique for the stress questions. So a question like, what makes you the best candidate for our position? If you've done the prep we're talking about, you are now thinking about the 3 key things that you bring to that job or to that job opportunity. And you're touching on them here. And you're bringing out different examples. If you'd mentioned it before in a strengths-based question, you're like, hey, as I mentioned in my strengths, these 3 things make me the most competitive candidate for this job because, can you explain why? The biggest initial challenge in the job, again, it's kind of an unfair question, right? But this is going back to the first set of questions. This is gauging your knowledge of the job description and your knowledge of areas of growth for you. So this is a chance for you to help them understand, maybe the answer is you're transitioning into a new field. So, when I think about the biggest initial challenge, I know that I have extensive experience in blah, but I would be working with a new team. And so the biggest initial challenge would be getting up to speed on how processes work in your organization and really understanding. So not so much that you have to, it's helpful to just think these ones through that you might be asked. Now, the describe yourself in 3 words or kind of random questions like that, there's no right way to answer these. The goal is just seeing how you think on the spot. They're a little bit harder to prepare for. I would encourage you, if you're encountering a job like this, not what they're going to ask on the academic job market, but in industry, especially in undergrad, you might have been asked these types of questions when you're interviewing to be an RA. So I hope that you won't encounter those, but if you do, there's no right answers. It's just remembering they're just trying to stress me out, and I can give a response that makes sense to me in the moment. And all that I need to do is, if I use those described in 3 words, I'm going to follow up and give examples. I'm not just going to say the 3 words and end it there. Now, I don't want to overlook your questions. So yes, we've talked about how you prep for interviews generally, whether they're for industry or for the academy. But it's also really important to remember what questions you have for them, right? The interview process is not only them interviewing you, but you determining if you want to work there. So I put up some very generic, typical questions, but I encourage you to think of what questions would help you to determine if you want to accept the job. What is it that you need to know that would help you out? We're not talking salary at this stage. We'll go into salary negotiation, talk about when you want to bring up salary. But these would be questions that help you determine, are these the humans I want to spend the bulk of my awake time with during the work week? For me, I love asking, what do you love about your job? Because it gives me I get a really good sense from the team of whether or not they feel a lot of enjoyment for their job, right? So you might want to know more about the office environment or workplace culture. So you could ask questions around that. You could ask questions around what makes someone successful in this role? What do you anticipate would help someone be successful in the first 30 days or the accomplishments expected in the first 90 days? Those questions people tend to ask so that you can hear the the response and then reiterate your experience in that area. So it's kind of self-serving. You can certainly ask more about any questions that are coming to you outside of salary, right? What's the most challenging aspects of your job? What are the barriers that you encounter? Think about what questions you want to know that are going to help you in ultimately making that decision. Now, when we think about academic interviews, you're going to be talking to many different groups of people. You're probably talking to a group of students. You're probably talking to a group of faculty. You're probably talking to a number of faculty individually, including the department chair, potentially the dean, just depends on what level you're at. So you're going to be meeting with lots and lots of humans. You're going to be giving a job talk, lots of different meetings. For every group of humans that you will be meeting with, whether it's one person or multiple, I would encourage you to prep some questions, have them ready to go. You don't have to ask those questions, but it's helpful to have them written down and prepped, especially in the higher education interview process. We go through so many different interviews that it is helpful to have them ready to go, especially if we have an idea, which they usually do give us in advance, an idea of who we'll be speaking with. We can make sure to craft specific questions based on the person that we're talking to and the positionality that they hold, what you might be able to glean from them versus from other folks. Similarly, if you know the same person is going to be in multiple interviews, it'll help you to make sure you prep questions that you're not asking. So you're not asking the exact same questions with every single person, that it is tailored. So again, I encourage you to spend a bit of time thinking about what questions you have and prepping those. Now, I did hint that I wanted to show you a resource that I think is really meaningful and helpful to utilize, and that's Big Interview. So if you haven't been on the platform before, Big Interview has lots of different resources available. So to register, right, you go here, you have to be in your ucsc.edu email address. If you have an account, just use the sign-in process. And what can you do on this platform? There's a basic interview curriculum that'll go even more in depth than what we did today. You can also look at practice sets, interview roulette, which is wild. It's preparing you for a variety of random questions. You can take a look at videos. So here is where you can find potential mock interviews. You can look by industry. Industry is more designed for outside of the academy. If you're prepping for the academy, most of those questions are going to be included in this general start here process. So you have lots of, you can look by competency, skill set, etc. So let's say you just want to look at the top 10 questions that you might be being asked. So you can have 3 different levels: standard, challenging, and really tough. And they have very different types that you can look at and practice. Now, when you do the practice, you're actually going to be able to record yourself and play the video back. The benefit to you is that it is really helpful, especially when you're prepping for virtual interviewing, to see how you look on camera. Where are you looking at the screen? And you can watch yourself back and see exactly how it goes. I know that it is not the most fun to do, but it is a really helpful way to get some immediate feedback from yourself about, was I rambling? What was I doing? And similarly, you can record questions and share it with a career engagement specialist or another person to get their feedback as well. In addition to coming to Career Success to practice interviewing. So I highly encourage, reach out to us if you have any questions at Career Success. We're happy to meet with you to prep for your interviews, and we wish you the best of luck as you interview.